I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer at Gold Derby, and I'm joined today by Sophie de Rakoff, a costume designer on The Morning Show. And Sophie, you served as the head costume designer for seasons 1 and 2 of the show, and then again for 3 episodes in season 3. But for the other 7 episodes, you were a designer specifically to Reese Witherspoon, while Deborah Maguire was one to Jennifer Aniston, and Beth Lancaster kind of took over the remaining duties. And this seems like a very unique way of working to me, having split duties like that. So to start things off, could you talk a bit about how this constellation came about and what maybe the benefits are of working this way?
It's an unusual way of working. I mean, quite often you'll find teams of designers, not quite often, but once in a while, and we are kind of an expanded version of that with really specific duties. So yes, so I was the lead designer on the first 2 seasons. Deborah came in on season 2 to design for Jennifer Aniston. And then when we got to season 3, it was, at this point, we know that, it's an enormous amount of work per show. It's like a very big show,
Yeah.
a very fast turnover, which is not unusual. I mean, a lot of episodics are structured like that. But for us and for me personally, I wanted to step back a little as we got further into the season, just purely for family reasons more than anything else. So we had set it up so that it would be, I would come on at the beginning of the season, Beth was my assistant costume designer from the first season. So, we are a team, like we are the couple like that. And this was kind of more of an official recognition with doing it this way, and then continue, with Deborah. So, the benefits of working like this are it's about communication. So basically it's because when you have so many characters, part of the job is, making sure that visually everything melds and works on screen as well as emotionally for the characters. And so with us, it's all about communication, and we have a very, very good our offices are next door to each other. Physically, we're in the same space, all of these kind of things.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you also said in an interview that you kind of wanted to normalize this way of working to also show other costume designers that it's possible, correct?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my career earlier on, I would come in and I would help on movies where they were having issues with, particularly female costumes. And for me, I was always like, I'm here to help. Like, I don't want your job. I'm here to help. I'm here to make this better. We're gonna, and there was, costume designers can be, or tended to be in the early days when I started working, very competitive. And to me, it's like you said, it was about normalizing this environment. You can work as a team. Everybody has their role in their lane, and you can meld everything together. And, we all rise together. And I think the show, is better for it visually. We all bring different things to the table, and we work incredibly well together, and we can get the work done. So I'm really proud of the fact that that's how it's all, how it was all formalized.
Yeah, I find it to be a very fascinating process, and they always say it takes a village, right? And I think that that applies in this case too. So I really like the way you did it. I think it's really, really fascinating. But to get into some of the episodes on which you served as the head costume designer this season, that includes the 2 opening episodes, which took place in 2022, 2 years after the events of the season 2 finale. And, I kind of associate 2022 with the year in which we slowly started coming out of the pandemic, when we slowly started, showing ourselves in public a bit more, started attending bigger events again. So, and I know that that was a very difficult transition for a lot of people. So on a broader note, would you say that you took the pandemic and the effects the pandemic had into consideration when you were designing some of the costumes for these characters in season 3?
I mean, for sure. I think, I think there was a shift culturally during the pandemic, obviously, for, for working professional people, who were at home and were communicating by Zoom and not in person. So how everybody dressed obviously changed. And I think, culturally, when we came out of it, what I saw, and maybe it was because I wanted to see it, or, I think you see what you want to see sometimes, but there
definitely.
was a shift in how people express themselves when they came out. And this is all about the individual. So I saw some people were more excited to get dressed up because they had been, so shuttered for so long. And then there were other people who got so used to being comfortable that it was hard for them to go back. And I'm talking about a corporate environment into, a
Yes,
corporate environment. So it was, and we explore power dynamics a lot in our show. We explore
absolutely.
on all different levels, and we explore it with the costumes. So it was this kind of like great meta opportunity to be able to really explore the people who were defining their own style and, came out of the pandemic in a certain way. And then the other people who felt safer just going straight back into the corporate world because they used it as a uniform and a defense. So it was taking what was, what seemed to be going on. And like you said, then just like working with it with the characters specific to their character.
Yeah, and then we could actually take that into our conversation about some of those characters, because let's talk about Bradley, Reese's character, because she's really reached a new stage in her life, both emotionally and professionally when we enter season 3. Professionally, because she is now a national evening news anchor, a position she's always dreamed of having. And you've talked about how you wanted her, or that how her anchor look is kind of specifically split to reflect this duality in her. So could you talk a bit about what dualities are on display or are in play in season 3 and how those reveal themselves in her outfits?
I mean, I think there had always been, I think Bradley has always had a conflicted persona. She comes from West
Absolutely.
Virginia. She finds herself in New York. We learn as the seasons go on that she's bisexual. There's always her performative nature as an anchor, and then who she is as a real person, which goes on a lot with all of our anchors. There's multiple layers of people who present for camera and what happens when they're off camera. And so, and she's also, she's centrist, she speaks to, in some ways, both sides of the country. So, in a very kind of micro and simplistic level, we see her in pantsuits and we see her in skirt suits. We see her hyper feminine, and then we see her slightly more degendered. We see, so and this is specifically with her anchor wear. So that was really about, like a very simple way of talking to, a dualistic performative mode that she's in. So it was, and it was really very simple. Sometimes these ideas just have to be really simple to be able to execute them. And that was where we landed.
And then, in terms of her personal life, she's also kind of stepped into her confidence, like you were talking about, and has become more secure with her identity, or about her identity, her sexuality, and so forth. And so how does that growing confidence, how is that reflected in her off-duty wear specifically then?
I mean, you're someone who's seen all 3 seasons, you can see across, and this is what's so interesting about designing for, I'm going to call it a TV show, but designing for a TV show as opposed to a movie, is that you have multiple seasons and arcs to explore these things. So, in the first season, Bradley's very basic, she's wearing straightforward, she's not someone who cares about her clothes. She's very practical. She's not necessarily, it's not in any way a priority for her. It's a practical function. And she has, she has a certain financial, slot that she fits in the beginning. And then across the seasons, she elevates as she, she spends more time in New York. She's surrounded by these people. She's picking things up by osmosis. And then, like you said, when we start the 3rd season, she's the evening news anchor. So she has this job that she has always wanted. So off camera, in the same way, her silhouette is always the same. It's the jeans, the leather jackets, the t-shirts, the sweater, the sweatpants, dresses every once in a while. And then, but it's elevated over the seasons to, as her status has elevated. And really that was very much with, we were very specific earlier on about using affordable, low key, mass market designers. And then as we've gone forward, it's been about, she has more money, she has more access, the character probably has a stylist. And so everything has been upgraded, and there's just a lot, and with her anchor wear, there's a lot more intentionality. She's intentionally choosing to look a certain way as opposed to looking a certain way by default, because that's what the network expected of her.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what's interesting when thinking about her season 3 arc is also that she's harboring this very big secret
Hmm.
that, her brother took part in the Capitol insurrection, and then she deleted footage of him assaulting a police officer. And this secret really starts eating away at her as the season progresses.
Hmm.
How would you say that growing inner disquiet, that growing guilt that she feels, influences how her wardrobe, especially her, off-duty wardrobe, evolves throughout
Hmm.
the season? Because when we're going through turmoil, when we're going through tough times, that typically reflects itself in the way we present ourselves in the clothes we wear. So how would you say it reflects itself in this case?
I mean, I think it was it's actually the inverse of that. To me, what Bradley was doing
Mm,
is she's hiding a secret. She's hiding the secret. It's, there's such a performative aspect to her character. And so it was business as usual in the front, and then everything else is internal.
mm-hmm.
So she's not going to let people know that things are falling until they really, really fall apart. And then we see her in an apartment and she's just a hot mess, and that,
Exactly. Yes.
and then that's just like what everybody does. Like you default to like your most comfortable t-shirt, the things, the grotty sweatpants that you don't wash, like you just don't care. So we have those moments with her, but
Yeah.
the lead up to that is about putting on the best foot forward and not letting anybody know what's going on. So it's just business as usual.
That makes complete sense. If we think about what we would do in that situation, I think many of us would do the same. We don't necessarily want to display or broadcast what is going on inside
Mhm.
of us. Especially in this case, it's not like she wants people to know about it. So it
Right.
makes sense that she wouldn't just
Yeah.
display that in her costume. So I think that's a really interesting perspective. Let's also briefly talk about Alex, played by Jennifer Aniston, because she too, she knows her power. With 3 seasons in
Mhm.
now, she knows her power. And this season, she has a new variety show podcast called Alex Unfiltered. And when we first see her in season 3, I feel that she kind of sports like a more laid back look, something that kind of says, I know who I am, I know my power, I'm comfortable where I am, and I'm comfortable with who I am. So, could
Mhm.
you briefly talk about in those first 2 episodes how you wanted to introduce her this season?
Well, all I can do about this, I can only speak for Deborah Maguire because
Mm-hmm.
Deb's Jen's costume
Yes.
designer. But
Yeah.
so but my understanding and what we talked about and what was a big conversation, with us, concerning Alex was this idea, and you totally picked up on it of more like accessibility.
Mm,
There's I'm not going to say it's a softening. I don't think that's quite what it
no.
was, but there was, because you're right. I mean, Alex always knows who she is. She's known it from the first minute of the first episode of the first season. That
Mm-hmm.
is somebody who is very, very clear about herself and her position in the world. And that's very much, she has a very, very strong look. And I think what Deborah did was she opened her up. Like there was more skin, there was more neck, there were softer colors when they were needed, and they were nuances. But I think you picked up on it, which I think shows that is that
Mm-hmm.
that is something that comes across, was that there's a
Absolutely.
slight tonal shift with her, and I mean an emotional tonal shift as opposed to a palette shift. And I think that was something that was a big discussion between the two of them, that it continues throughout the season. That was like was a very specific hook that they wanted to hang
Mm-hmm.
Alex's on this year.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere where you also really said that it was not supposed to change too much.
Mhm.
I don't know if it was you or Deborah, but one of you said, you want to make sure that, yes, there are like subtle changes, but it's not supposed to change all of a sudden. It's not necessarily like Bradley. That's like a very different character development that we've seen, right?
Exactly. Yes, I think that's exactly what Deb would say. It's a
Mm-hmm.
very, it's like I said, it's about nuances with Alex.
You're
It's
right.
like it's subtle because she is so sure of who she is.
Mm-hmm. And then I think the opposite, well, not the opposite of subtle, but someone where we do see a big change is Stella Back, played by Greta Lee. And I just find that she brings, in general, just a very different energy to the show, which makes sense because she comes from a different background. She comes from a
Right.
Silicon Valley, from a tech background.
Hmm.
And then what we see in season 3, as she continues to climb the corporate ladder, you can really tell how her entire appearance kind of changes. And I think that you've said that she acquires a more academic, intellectual look in season 3. So could you expand a bit on that?
I mean, I think, Stella is the character that, we as designers can really explore what is going on in fashion in many ways, because she came and because like, she has a different background. She comes from tech. We built a whole backstory for her in our department, in our heads,
Mm-hmm.
that she went to underground clubs, and, that there was, there was a whole other, and she looks at street style, and she's just very, she's much more in tune with that world in a very organic way. So, that's why you see the hoodies and the sneakers, and it's, and the Nike in the first season, because she's coming out of that and she's finding her footing. So she's reinterpreting what she considers to be, a corporate way of dressing, but in a very specific way. And season 3, again, it's about elevation, was another continuation of this. Like, she is now the head of news, so she stepped up into a corporate world, but she will always be herself. So, it was about the reinterpretation of suiting, but doing it with separates, with designers like Sakai and Loewe, and so that, she's wearing a bomber jacket with a skirt, but it is a suit because it matches, it's like, so there's all these kind of moments. And then, but she'll take, she'll wear a suit, but it'll be Dries Van Noten, and then she'll wear it with, like a very like tight microfiber turtleneck. So it's like, you can talk about Stella with a lot more focus on the designers, because if your designers, they tell the story, and if you don't, and you're not familiar with it, that's great too, because you can just look at her silhouette and know, oh, she's different and she's doing her own thing. So, and that's why she's a really interesting character to work with. She's like, she's a completely different canvas from the others.
Yeah. She's completely unpredictable in a way. You just never know what you're going to get from her. I felt like every episode, every time she, every time she wore something different, I was like, oh, wow, this is not something I mean, you expect it in a way, because you have kind of grown accustomed to her new style, but you don't expect whatever, she puts together. I think I love her looks in season 3. And I know a lot of people who love them as well. There was a lot of conversations about how she looked.
Thank you. We were very pleased. Let's put it that way. I mean, Stella, she was the one character everyone in the department was like, please let me shop for Stella. What are we doing with Stella? It's just, she's very satisfying.
I can imagine, and the result definitely shows. I mean, it's just some incredible looks. And I think someone who also brings a different energy to the show is Chris Hunter, played by Nicole Beharie. And again, she's someone who comes from a different background, a sports background, and she kind of brings a pop of color to the show, right? When she's first introduced, she's wearing these 2 different shades of green that I don't think we've necessarily seen on the show before, at least not in that combination. So talk a bit about, what you wanted to communicate with her looks, specifically in these first 2 episodes.
I mean, it was, the joy of Chris was that, as that we finally had an anchor that we could do what anchors do, in the real world of the morning news, like bring the color, bring the vibrancy, like bring the flirtatiousness, and which, because Alex and Bradley are so idiosyncratic, they weren't really characters that you could explore that with. And then, and then we have someone who comes from, she's a professional athlete, and is so, is body conscious, and is, and is really in touch with her physicality. And so, so we were able to, use the prints. And, the one thing we were really specific about was that we wanted like geographic lines with her. We didn't want it to be floral. We didn't want it to be too soft. It would be like racing stripes and, and geographic logos, and then these brighter colors, and the trick was always to balance it with everybody else, and that's what's really, because the morning show background, the logos and the backdrops and everything are so bright.
Right.
It's like, it was about finding the colors that worked with that didn't clash, but also knowing that you have to balance the fact that, the other morning anchors, one of whom's Yanko, so he's a bit more subdued, and Alex always tends to wear darker colors. So it became, so it was, the trick was to make that work without drawing the eye too much to Chris, but really, but still being able to explore like this amazing vibrancy with her.
Yeah, there's also something that she wears in the second episode, a very interesting color combination. I think it's like orange and it's purple. So I just think she really, really stands out. And that's
She
something
really,
that.
and it was interesting with her though, you know, because I can't remember if it's episode 2 or 3, but when she interviews Sybil,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
3. Yeah.
there, and then we deliberately like toned her down and pulled her back, but kept her in a similar silhouette, because as always, everybody has to, the characters need to work for their moments. You know, you have to, you know, we really think and because we communicate so much with color, like we think very long and hard about what is the right color for these moments to be able to, you know, to keep telling the story, but be true to the character at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, on a final note, I do think that the men sometimes get a short shrift when it comes to costume design, because there's obviously a lot of work being done on them, right?
Yeah.
So let's actually end on Corey, because he's at the beginning of season 3, he's kind of on top of the world, right? He's bought this uber luxurious mansion in the Hamptons, and you can just tell that he's reached this new level of wealth, or at least that's how I saw it. So how does this influence, you know, some of the shirts that he wears, some of the, you know, in general, some of the shirts, some of the suits that he wears, because I assume that there must have been an upgrade for him in his life. I assume that he just bought a bunch of new stuff.
Right. I mean, yes. I mean, first of all, we love Corey and we love Billy, and doing fittings with Billy, like it truly is, it's like a lesson in character development. Like you can really, really get into the nitty gritty with him about the smallest details, as well as the, you know, the bigger picture. And it, ever since the first season, it's just been delightful, because, you know, you can really get into the psychology behind design with Billy. And so, you know, what we did, I think, in season 3, it was a continuation of this idea that this is a man that likes to wear a uniform. Again, like there's a boundary with him. And it was, you know, again, the nuances, a lot of them with the shirts and ties, like, you know, it was, he was already elevated. The trick with him, I think, was figuring out, because we see him so much at work, you know, what was going on in his personal life when we dialed it back to the more casual clothes. You know, but we custom build a lot of stuff for Corey. Like we custom build his shirts and we custom build his ties, because, you know, we want to make sure that we have everything be complementary tonally, so it doesn't distract, because that's what Corey wants. He doesn't want to distract with how he looks. He just wants to, again, you know, explore his power. So honestly, a lot of the conversations were about tie on and tie off, you know. It's like, that's really, it was very, very simple with him, as well as, you know, like he wears, you know, it's interesting, like he wears Dior, like a Dior's man suit fits him really well. You know, as does Paul Smith, as does Xenia. You start to, you know, work with these labels, because A, because of the fit, and B, because of the quality of the fabrics, you can read the luxury immediately.
Yeah, and it really just comes down to those nuances, right? Not the viewer won't catch everything, but it's those nuances that really matter. And I think sometimes, especially with men, especially on a show like this, sometimes people don't necessarily think about them. So I think I like that you mentioned.
Yeah, you're right. The men do get. They get shorted, but you know, we put just as much into them as we do to everybody else, but it's a subtler world, you know. It shows that the men are not the peacocks. So
absolutely. And I think that's a perfect note for us to end on. Sophie, thank you so much for your time today, for walking me through your work on season 3, and congratulations on the season. We're looking forward to season 4.
Thank you so much. So am I. Pleasure to meet you. Thank you.